Hello, everybody. Welcome to this invited event of the Association for Women in Psychology conference. I have the honor of interviewing one of AWP's co-founders, Dr. Phyllis Chesler. She is the pioneer who gave birth to second wave feminist psychology with her 1972 book, Women and Madness. That was the stunning work that changed the world for all who read it. It was a revelation about how women were treated in the mental health system, unjustifiably called mad for such things as refusing to do the housework, loving women rather than men, belonging to a racialized group. She had made it impossible for any reader to assume that therapists were scientists who made objective decisions about what mental illness was, about who had mental illness and what should be done to them. Too often what should be done to them, not for them. She's Professor Emeritus of Psychology and Women's Studies from CUNY. She's written 20 books in all, and she's a machine combining remarkable energy and breadth and depth of knowledge and humanity and love and compassion. She's a Renaissance woman. And I must tell you, one of the things I admire most about her, which is her openness to viewpoints that differ from hers and her refusal to allow such differences to harm important friendships that she treasures. Years ago, I reviewed a book that she wrote, and it included some criticism and some disagreement with what she wrote. The only way that she responded to my having written the review was to thank me for having taken the time and the trouble to write that review. Now, over to Phyllis Chesler. Welcome, Phyllis. I want to start, we won't have nearly enough time to talk about everything that you could talk about that's of interest, but I want to start with the question of how did you get to be a feminist?
Well, who really has the answer to such a question? I was lucky to be alive and educated and in America at a time when feminism was rising in the land, but also perhaps my life as a girl, with all of its harassment and violence, opened me to the necessity of feminist analysis. And then the fact that I was a young bride in Kabul, Afghanistan in 1961, and I saw women stumbling around in burqas and literally sent to the back of the bus. And in my diary, I used the word patriarchy for the first time to describe it. I don't know where I found that word from. And it was easy to become a feminist in the late 1960s in America. They didn't hate us yet. They didn't minimize us yet. And we had each other. All of a sudden, we only had male professors. We only read books by men, by and large. And then we had each other. And it was extraordinary. We were not alone anymore. And we didn't yet understand that we could not claim victory in our lifetime, but we certainly could claim the struggle, the honorable struggle.
So that's really so beautiful and moving. How did you get to be or decide to become a psychologist?
Good question. I was already reading Freud and Karen Horney when I was a young teenager on my own. Nobody said, oh, you must read this. And I'll tell you a secret. When I was a child, I was in treatment with a female psychoanalyst. It's a story for another day. And she was Melanie Klein's daughter.
Oh.
I will say no more at this time, but I think that opened me, or actually I fled in terror from many play therapy sessions. But I'm also a very quintessential American. I'm the daughter and the granddaughter of immigrants. I'm a child of the working poor, a daughter of earth, as Agnes Smedley said. But luck and very hard work and being alive at a moment in history when things were suddenly possible led me to decide, well, you know, I really want to be a writer. How can I support myself and be a writer? I'll be a Viennese witch doctor. I'll be a psychoanalyst. I'll work at home. for half the day and write the other half. Hence my career decision.
Fascinating. So what was it like to be a woman psychologist right before you and some colleagues founded AWP, and what led to that founding? Who else was involved?
Well, quite simply, it was hell. We had very few female teachers, no mentors. I had no relatives who were intellectuals or professionals. And I had to support myself all through college and through graduate school, which is fine. And it toughened me up for the struggles ahead. And I was at the mercy, as we all were, of fairly predatory male professors and male employers, boyfriends too. And women psychologists and psychiatrists at the time had internalized the same sexist views of woman and humanity that men had. And I have details that are quite delicious, but we don't have enough time. So no one understood what women want, Freud's famous questions. And I'll tell one anecdote before I get to the founding of AWP. We began to gather in 1969, and many of us had been veterans of struggles for civil rights, struggles on the left, struggles for equality of all kinds, against racism, against the war in Vietnam. But at a certain moment, none of this had to do with women's oppression or women's liberation. So we said famously goodbye to all that. And I was in a room with Naomi Weinstein. We were sharing it at the AWP meeting. And
this is before AWP?
This was a year before.
So this was at
American. It was the planning year. And we had both published articles in Science magazine. And at a certain point, we looked at each other very shyly. I said, "Are you Weinstein of such and such?" And she said, "Are you Chesler of such and such?" And we said, "Are we allowed to talk about that?" Because that was like hard science, not feminism. Well, so we were so used to forming organizations every day, every month, women feminists were doing that. So in 1969, myself and 11 other women, good women, co-founded AWP. And I want to name our names. Many are no longer with us. Ellen Afterman, Joan Berman, myself, E. Kitch Childs, Joanne Evans Gardner, Joan Justing, Mimi Kiefer, Lee Marlowe, Dorothy Riddle, Mary Stewart, Elaine Stocker, and Naomi Weinstein. 7 Jewish girls, 1 African American, 4 Christians. Make of that what you will. Now, I was studying what people say they wanted in therapy and who did they want to see as a therapist, especially what women. And everybody was saying, I want a male, as in God is a male doctor, a male therapist will surely understand me. Not so, not so. And AWP probably unwisely appointed myself and Dorothy Riddle to speak for us at that annual session of the American Psychological Association. And I seized the moment in a way that may have made the other women initially nervous. I wanted to join our struggle to that of other liberation groups. And so I spelled out the harms done to women and how no one had ever administered a test for mental health, but only diagnosed women in crazy ways that led to mistreatment and no help. And I then demanded $1 million in reparations. Little enough, it was a small sum. And the mainly male audience, about 2,000, began to rustle and laugh and titter and get a bit nervous. And then most delicious, I heard muttering of these women have penis envy. Oh. So I laughed And I vowed never to return to APA until or unless we get those reparations, which we never got. And I literally started writing Women in Madness on the plane home from Miami. I would have written, and this whole thing made world headlines. And publishers were calling me. I was planning to hand it out on street corners, whatever I would write, because feminists wrote the most extraordinary radical stuff and handed it out as pamphlets, zines. It was a moment in history that has never, we have not yet had a moment like that again. So if we had a lot of time, maybe another time, we could talk about what I think has changed since then, 50 to 100 years ago, what's gotten worse, what's gotten better, what's different. We don't have enough time, but the founding of AWP was very electrifying. Dorothy and I were quoted in the New York Times and around the world, around the world. And then everyone from AWP who wanted to deliver papers at APA was now allowed and invited to do so. We had come of age, for whatever that's worth.
We're allowed to do so at APA?
Yes.
At AWP? At APA now?
No, at APA. Committees, we formed, I didn't go back, I didn't get the money. So many other groups got money, in a sense, restitution, reparations, not the women.
Can you take us into the room for a minute where the idea to create AWP came up, and what was to be the mission of AWP and the function?
Well, it was going, first, some things are mired in mystery. And I don't think it was my idea. It seemed to be rising up collectively as a necessity, as an opportunity that many of us saw at once. And we wanted to change the practice of delivering mental health care. We wanted to study, we wanted to research, we wanted to be activists, we wanted to be different kinds of therapists, different kinds of teachers. We wanted to teach different things. How do you begin to transform a profession in a radically feminist way? We tried to begin to do just that. And one of the things that I would love younger members of AWP to consider is we put together, Ellen Cole, Esther Rothblum, and myself, a book called Feminist Foremothers in Women's Studies, Mental Health, and Psychology. But no one has ever done something, women in law, women in science, women in medicine, because the transformation of the professions have been underrated as part of the second wave. The sexy, more dramatic stuff is the street marches, the sit-ins, occupying offices, all of that Hollywood jazz, which has its place, as do class action lawsuits. So the transformation, I think of theology, transformed in radically feminist ways, and a body of knowledge. I would love interviews with the women who are still alive, who are part of this.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
So when did AWP, was the idea for AWP to have its own conferences as well as getting to present at APA?
We probably thought we would just take over the immediate world in some way, that was not enunciated or clarified, and became, over time, it became an annual conference. Over time, it became a series of panels. Most important, perhaps, over time, women found each other and could exchange vital information, and of a professional nature, not necessarily trendy political conformist nature, but what do you do if you have a woman like such and such who's threatening suicide? She doesn't have any money, her family won't support her. What can we say? Remember Rochelle Josefowitz-Siegel, bibliotherapy. If you start giving any kind of woman in trouble a book to read, the right book, it could totally begin her on her steps. What books then? And so on. I mean, if we're going to throw out psychoanalysis, which I'm not in favor of, it's a very interesting way of understanding human nature. If we're going to throw out everything that the men have done, well, what are we going to replace it with? You know, what foundation are we standing on? Who's going to decide? So this was going to be a forum, a platform, a network that could address this.
And you know, people at AWP even now will say, oh my God, I didn't know there were other women who felt this, who experienced this, who had these questions. And
really,
speaking of, what are we going to replace the things we throw out with? You said that on the way back from that initial AWP meeting, you started writing Women in Madness on the Plane. So that was for those people who might not have heard of the book yet, but need to. That was your first book, and it quickly established you as really the pioneer feminist psychologist. So could you talk about that book, and how do you feel about it now?
I was just thinking that I wanted the money for shelters for women who were battered by patriarchy. And this is before domestic violence, battering, intimate partner battering became a hot button issue, which it continues to be. And as I said, we didn't get the money. So I was writing in such a heat of passion, and it's deeply researched. And who knows, I mean, there's so much in it. It's almost like I was channeling, you know, Greek mythology, history, psychoanalytic literature, NIMH statistics. I interviewed a lot of women, and these interviews are preserved in some sense in the book. And
that was revolutionary in itself, that you actually listened to women and you honored and dignified their viewpoints and their experiences.
Oh, totally. Yeah, totally. And I would try very hard not to interrupt anyone. And I waited until the end when the interview was over, when I'd say, well, you ought to think of this, or you could do that, you know, because these women were each, there was a woman, oh, there's so many. There was a Hispanic woman whose husband kept putting her away into the psychiatric wing of a local hospital. Why? Well, you know, she got sad and didn't want to do the housework, literally, and he had a girlfriend. And I finally said to her, hey, you don't have to take this. And she ultimately didn't. And years later, I turned over the tape of that interview to Marge Piercy, who then transformed this woman into a heroine in Woman at the Edge of Time, I think the title was. So I was the first one of us who had a chapter on lesbians in therapy, third world women in therapy. But looking back, many of my suggestions have led to the body of work that I created thereafter. I said we have to celebrate difference, not merely tolerate it. That women have to learn to develop very strong egos if we're going to be warriors, and if we're going to have an ounce of pleasure in our lives. We have to be really tough, not mean, not hard, but strong. All kinds of suggestions that I made, I can't understand how I knew this. I was 31 years old as I was writing it.
Right, because it was revolutionary, right? People are still discovering and rediscovering this. And certainly at the time, people hadn't said that before. And
no, this is true.
So many of us I know who read the book when it first came out. Every time there was a new group of women that you were talking about, you know, each one was another revelation. Oh my God, I never thought about what it would be like to be in that group.
Oh, I had the Amazons in there.
Yeah. Yes.
As daughter figures, warrior figures,
That's
mythological.
you're a Renaissance woman. I mean, you're an expert on opera and mythology and history, and you
Don't
brought
embarrass
to
me,
bear. Well, you really
please, please.
brought all that to bear.
Mhm.
So each of your 20 books has been groundbreaking. And, there's some people, I've always said as a psychologist, it's sometimes embarrassing because a lot of psychologists, they'll write about something, then they'll write about that thing again. Then they'll change it a little bit and write about it again.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
Phyllis Chesler, who every time she writes a new book, it's about something that is totally different from what you've written about before. And each one is groundbreaking. So I wonder, could you talk a bit about how did you choose your subjects, or how did they come to you?
You know what?
But,
Because you asked me this question, I thought about it.
uh-huh.
Many of the themes that I address subsequently are hidden right there in Women in Madness. And all I had to do, like Theseus, is follow the yellow brick road, so to speak, in the labyrinth. So, for example, I retold the story of the goddess Demeter and her daughter Persephone. And she lost that daughter to the father who was the king of the underworld, Hades. Well, look at that. A custody battle, motherhood with child, a diary of motherhood. And when I wrote about motherhood and mothers on trial, the battle for children and custody, it was not acceptable. It was not politically correct. It was, why are you bothering with that? And anyway, what could you ever know about motherhood? Endless. So
It was also very dangerous to write about good mothers losing custody of their children because they often lost the custody to
totally,
very powerful, scary men.
totally, to batterers who sometimes were child abusers and who handed them off to the next wife or girlfriend, and wounding and damaging that mother and that child forevermore. And I continued it in Sacred Bond, The Legacy of Baby M. At the time, I didn't say, oh, well, I'm continuing. Then Woman's Inhumanity to Woman, for example, buried in Women in Madness is the trashing that women, we didn't have a name for it yet. We denied that it existed because we were so thrilled to find each other women to talk with, to be intimate with, to do work with, great work in the world, that we didn't want to say, oh, I was just shunned by my whole CR group. Everyone turned her back, or somebody just stole my husband. Yes, it was my best friend. We didn't want to look at this, or the rivalries in a polygamous marriage. So slowly, and so I told the bell of this theme in Women in Madness, but it took me about 20 years to both interview women, read everything. I was warned not to publish on the subject because, quote, the men would use it against us. And said but hey, isn't the truth going to set us free? Isn't denying internalized sexism, like internalized racism, the problem? We may not become perfect in our lifetimes in every episode, but if we're aware of it and we are struggling to resist it, that's the next step. You can't do that if you're unconscious and if you're in denial, right?
Right. And if you did continue to deny it, then you were only looking at part of what harm the patriarchy does. Yes, it makes it difficult to live in a world with men, but it can also make it very difficult to live in a world where women are set up against each other.
Yes. And you know what? We have to also consider that it's not only the men who are setting us up against each other.
Mm-hmm.
We have to consider the possibility that women are actors in human history and make choices. And as feminists have said, have agency and have responsibility. So we don't always have to be there are many things, and I discussed this in Letters to a Young Feminist, when I got very ill and thought, might shuffle off the mortal coil. I wanted to pass along some important knowledge that we'd amassed. And I would recommend reading that, actually. I looked at it the other day for us. So the For example, psychologically, women need to engage in group sports. Why? Because instead of being set up one beauty queen, one wife, the winner, just the one and only, you only win if your team wins. And everybody wins when the star makes the basket or the hoop. What, right? And that hadn't occurred to me since I didn't do team sports. Now there's more of it, but you didn't either.
Yeah.
Well, girls weren't encouraged in athletics unless you were very, very wealthy, and took lessons.
Can I ask, again, with regard to these 20 groundbreaking books, where in the world does your apparently boundless energy come from?
Oh, look who's asking.
No.
Oh, yes.
No, but seriously. Where do you get your energy?
Well, I have a tremendous work ethic. Does this come from being a daughter of the working poor? Does it come from the treasury of knowledge amassed by the Jews, with the most important lesson being that one must become educated and understand stuff? And you don't throw out the past. You master it. You command it. And that means the classics that white men also, have composed and written, and then you use it in your time for your purposes, according to your vision. You just don't toss it. So, and that's one thing I learned from appreciating a religious tradition. So going back to Kabul, Afghanistan, which I write about in An American Bride in Kabul, I didn't ever think I'd write about it, but I have. I heard there about honor killings, but that was not what it was called. It's femicide. And I thought about it. I kept, and now I'm one of the world's known experts in it. I've done 4 academic studies. Why is it important to do an academic study? Because it then allows me and anyone else to submit affidavits to a courtroom in America on behalf of a woman who's in flight from being honor killed and who's applying for political asylum. And I think it is such important feminist work, and it's a form of activism. I'm 80, I can't run around in the streets anymore. And I would love to do a 5th and final study, but I need a co-author. And hopefully a co-author who's younger than me and who wants to continue this work. So I work with lawyers who are representing asylum applicants, usually for no money, because they have no money. And there was one case that was very moving. I decided, based on my interviewing her or reading the details, horrifying details, and she was from Afghanistan. And I said, I think she should pay me something. And I didn't really mean it. I was thinking that it would mean a lot to her if she could. She sent me a check for $100. It was very, very moving. I knew she didn't have it, so that she could do it. And I was once trapped in Afghanistan.
It's an amazing thing you wrote about that.
No, so I understand how indeed a woman can be trapped with no exit, with no passport back to the future, trapped in a time zone that is medieval. And today,
I just want to say, this is a perfect example of how you repeatedly, you wade into the darkest corners, and you come out with documentation, which is so important because it's so easy for women to be dismissed, especially if you're talking about things nobody wants to hear about. You come out with documentation, with the whole historical context, with the literary context, and with love and passion. And also you manage to keep this wonderful sense of humor, which is just astonishing. We've got a few more questions I want to be sure we get to.
well, all right.
What kind of price did you pay, and did feminist women pay, starting with feminism's second wave, in order to come into your own?
Well, I wasn't a feminist, the fun kind. So they hated me at my university because I was really radical. And as I became uh, influential and well known, they hated me more because it was jealousy and envy. And you wrote the book with the extraordinary title, Lifting a Ton of Feathers, the life of women in the academy. So I never got another job offer. I was never, ever asked to deliver an address at graduation. I had to fight to get tenure, to keep tenure, and I had to fight for each level of advancement to become a full professor only after 22 years. This is ridiculous. But that's how, I mean, here's an example. I was appealing my non-promotion, and somebody, a wonderful woman, came and said, "Don't you understand we have Simone de Beauvoir at our university? Why are you not recognizing her?" And the guy who ran the gym department said, "But I'm looking at her resume. She seems to only write about women."
Oh.
So at that time, we were threatening to the academy. It wasn't like it is now, where feminists have been forced to accept a ghetto, women's studies. I had imagined this is in every discipline, everywhere, but that's another discussion. So we were threatening. I forced my department through sheer energy to hire a majority of women in the department. I was the first woman hired. They didn't like that. The first faculty Christmas, I'm sitting with a bunch of men at a table, and they turned to me and they said, "Well, you'll get the gifts for the secretaries." And I said, "Who are you talking to?" I looked around. I said, "I'm not one of those human shoppers. I'm really busy." I mean, I have attitude. It's bad. I'm bad. So
but they wanted you to, what strikes me, they wanted you to be a queen bee. We'll let you stay here against a lot of protests, but don't bring on other women, for God's sake.
Right. And if you're going to be here, then for heaven's sakes, be nice, go shopping for the secretaries, make the choices for the gifts. I said, I haven't got a clue. I'm not a human shopper. I don't spend time doing that. I always had a meeting to go to. It's true at the time. So, and the feminism, not the fun kind, hasn't triumphed in the academy. We lost on pornography, we lost on prostitution, which we view as abolitionists as sex slavery, trafficking. Honorable feminists view it as sex work and they want to decriminalize it or legalize it. But the academy recognizes one point of view, not the other. And so many burning issues that are woman specific have simply been erased. I mean, women's studies got erased by gender studies. And I know I'm talking to you, I'm begging you to listen to me. And then gender studies got erased by LGBTQIA studies. And women were not the center of focus, only if you were a woman of color who was a vegetarian and left-handed and oppressed in a particular way, or you're going to be studied. And this is,
which is a way of dividing women against each other, right?
Yes.
People who identify as women against each other, instead of looking for the commonalities, and there should be room for
yes.
I just want to say too, when you were talking about the way you were treated, I just think of today Jennifer Fried at the University of Oregon, who's having to fight tooth and nail for, like you, she's a scrupulous scientist. She really can back up everything she says. She's underpaid. She's not respected compared to her male colleagues. Why? What does she write about? She writes about child sexual abuse. That's still not acceptable. It still isn't. And speaking of things that are still not acceptable, I want to ask you, what led you to write your most recent book, which I've read, which is phenomenal, and it's called Requiem for a Female Serial Killer. And what do you hope it will achieve?
I got into it when Eileen Wuornos, who's been misrepresented in the wonderful film Monster, was suddenly, I thought it was an Orson Welles broadcast. 7 white men are dead on the highways. Their corpses are littering the highways, and they're looking for a woman or for two women who did it. And I figured this can't be real. Well, it was real. And I thought, okay, this is an opportunity to teach a jury, and therefore the world, because there was so much attention focused on this case, to teach everyone how dangerous it is to be a prostituted woman, how much violence and hatred you have to absorb. And talking about serial killers are mainly men who kill women and who target prostitutes, whose corpses litter the landscape coast to coast on every continent. And she was the extraordinary exception. She was very unique because she fought back. She didn't die an anonymous death that she was meant to die after the incest and rape and getting impregnated as a young teenager and giving the child away for adoption and being born with lots of cognitive neurological limitations. So this was a case with my name on it. Now, unfortunately, I got through to her. I had a correspondence with her. I proposed witnesses that would testify on her behalf. She called us the testifying witnesses, but for whatever reason, her defense attorney did not call a single one of us. And more's the pity, they did execute her. She got as little justice as most women who commit a murder get when they're sentenced. Now, I have to say, let me just share that I did an FBI-like profiling of her, but it took years for me to figure it out. So she's not like other savagely abused young girls who just marry batterers and come to sad and sorry endings if they have no feminist rescue safety net. And she's not like male serial killers at all. And she's not like female serial killers. Female serial killers are known as Black widows, and they kill husband after husband for money, or they're nurses who kill patient after patient because they can, or for money, or who kill children, which is very rare. She went after Johns. She went after adult white men. This is like unheard of. So she was celebrated by, I didn't know this, she has a cult following. I was not part of the cult following, and I couldn't save her. And that was I couldn't save her. I tried to persuade her, you know, you could really be found mentally incompetent. You could live. And she didn't want to go to a nut house. I said, and she said, anyway, well, you know, she didn't want to think that anything was wrong with her. Well, everything was wrong with her. I mean, talk about
so traumatized, and she had
beyond traumatized and a serious alcoholic.
Yeah.
And living on the edge of the universe. I mean, hard life. How could she be okay? No one in that situation can be okay. But she didn't want to opt for that. It was a very funny conversation for me to have, trying to tell a woman, listen, if you want to live, cop a plea. And her saying, no. I said, I think you could pass.
So the woman who wrote Women in Madness is saying,
right,
woman, go ahead, say you're mad. It will save your life, right? Because that's the only language the court might understand.
I've never said that to anyone else ever.
Yeah. And you know, I have to tell you, when I read that book, I was thinking, I'm a longtime second wave feminist, and I was thinking, I was hearing the voices of some other feminists to whom you alluded, who say, oh, well, if a woman wants to be a prostitute, it's her body. She should get just as an active agency. And you know what? Maybe there are some out there. When I worked at the family court clinic in Toronto, and I saw these teenage girls who fled abusive homes and ended up in detention because the only way they could support themselves as kids on the street was to be a prostitute. They weren't happy. This wasn't giving them a sense of agency and control. And so I thought, well, even if there are some out there like that, what Phyllis Chesler is having us do in this book is look at what usually happens with women who are prostitutes and girls who are prostitutes. And could you talk about the statistics that you found, that like which men who are serial killers, how many do they kill? And what happens to
Oh,
women? And here's this woman
oh.
who killed 7 Johns, and what happened to her?
I didn't say that. I wanted to argue that prostitutes have the right to self-defense. I wanted to expand the battered woman syndrome to include prostituted women who are really battered by thousands of men. And yes, there's a 1 to 2% exception to the rule, but most of the prostitutes in America, let's just stay in America, come from racially marginalized homes where they have been abused, neglected, serially raped, and when they or their white counterparts want to finally be done with this, save themselves, they run into the street, they run into pimps. Even when it's legal, the hostility and the violence towards women as prostitute is off the charts. So serial killer men don't get found for 20 years. And they just keep killing women and prostitutes and women who they think are prostitutes. And some of them don't even get the death sentence. Women kill in self-defense, get life, no parole. Sometimes they get executed. I'm thinking of many cases. But and you know, Warnos was not sympathetic, and that's where feminists need to stand. It's very easy to stand with a really nice, friendly, you know, not that battered, beaten down woman. If we stand with women who are smelling bad, who, I mean, when you're really tortured, you're going to have all those symptoms of hypervigilance. You're going to doom your own case in court. You're not going to know who to trust. You're going to trust no one. You're going to have outbursts of anger. You're going to have sleepless.
Not a nice woman.
Not nice, not contained, too emotional, too extreme. But that's where we also have to stand if we understand how she came to be this way.
That's so moving. All right, to wrap up, if you could choose 3 major goals of UWP for the future as one of its founders, what would they be?
I would want you to bring as much passion and sense of outrage to all the issues of sexism, as many do now to issues that are important, such as racism and capitalism and nationalism and climate change and militarism and all the LGBTQIA issues. Because as Paula said, it divides women from each other and doesn't find the common issues that bind us and torment us. And, you know, those are the burning issues that we voiced, but we certainly didn't get rid of. We haven't gotten rid of incest or rape or sexual harassment just because you have some Hollywood at Me Too movement marches, nice enough. But what about the women who are working in agricultural fields where they're going to lose their jobs and they're going to lose their kids if they don't put out, if to keep their job, or in factories, you know, those men, anonymous men, not hotshots from Hollywood, they've yet to be tried. Those women have yet to have any kind of justice. And then there's everything else that we talked about, certainly prostitution and honor killing and FGM, which goes on in America. So I would like passion and sense of urgency.
Sorry, I just wanted to say, could you say what FGM is for those?
Female genital mutilation. And I published a piece about it at a very important academic journal with the title of Dignity that Donna Hughes founded. And it's a place you might consider writing for. I'm on their editorial board. And then, as we've already just said, we have to think globally. The old phrase was, and act locally. But since women from all over the world are here in America, we can do that. We can do that. It's what I'm doing with the affidavits for the political asylum applicants. And well, how can I put this? I have to repeat, always speak truth to power. Always have courage. Could be your last moment on earth. don't go with the crowd. Don't, even though you may get in trouble if you don't, someone has got to say, hey, the emperor's naked, even if it's a little child. Yeah.
And I just want to refer back to what you said about what about the women who work in agriculture or in hot dog factories or whatever. Those women, or those women who are battered by their partners, and somehow that's not in the news enough. It was yet years ago. It's not anymore. It's gone underground. So each of those groups of women includes women of color, immigrant women, women from LGBTQIA. So
Totally.
it's not a matter. I love what you say. It's not a matter of choosing, well, we're going to ignore this group or ignore that group and just look at women in general. You have to remember that women in general include all of these other groups
Yes.
of women, and together we can find commonality and have more power.
So well said. Listen, AWP, go and get the $1 million.
Yes.
See if it's there at APA.
The Phyllis Chesler Government in Exile, Feminist Government in Exile. I love that you coined that phrase.
Yeah.
So I want to end by, first of all, thanking you, Phyllis. Such an honor and a pleasure to get to interview you. It's so important to have this information for APA history and for the history of women and feminism generally. And Phyllis Chesler has a website. It's Phyllis hyphen, not dash, Phyllis hyphen Chesler. And on that website, you can contact her if you want to help with the research on honor killings and the affidavits, if you want to help with any of her other research. When this interview has been shown at AWP, then we would like to put it on her website, on my website, all over the internet. And Joe Watson in England, who has the A Disorder for Everyone organization with Dr. Lucy Johnstone, will put it on their Facebook page, which is called Drop the Disorder. All these people who are your heirs, Phyllis. And so thank you again, and much love to you and to AWP.
You are the most wonderful interviewer, quite my peer, my comrade, my friend.
Thank you. I'm going
You
to
had an interview.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.